Hello and welcome to the AVRUM ROSENSWEIG show.
Welcome to one of the internet's best podcasts, where we dive deep into the lives of the extraordinary and fascinating people who leave an indelible mark on our world. Join us as we explore their captivating stories, remarkable achievements, and unique perspectives that shape history and inspire generations. Get ready to embark on a journey through the lives of inspiring people unlike any other.
Hi, folks, and welcome to the show. Indeed, my name is AVRUM ROSENSWEIG, and I'm very, very happy to be here with you, and I thank you so much for joining me. I remind everybody that we have to remember that we live in a most beautiful world, that we have accomplished incredible things over the last 6,000 years or 2 billion years, or whatever your spiritual predilection is or understanding of life. Just some news came out prior to the show that I was reading that Canada, which is where I live in Toronto, has been determined by the diaspora ministry in Israel to be the most anti-Semitic country in the world. And that is very, very disheartening, and that's very difficult. But what that means is that we all have a lot of work to do. And we have to remember, it's incredibly important that we remember with that news that there are a lot of people out there who are not Jewish who are our friends, people who do like us, right? People who are fascinated by the Jewish people, by the B'nai Yisrael. And we have to attach ourselves to them. And we have to all be involved in actualizing the beauty that lies within us as a Jew. Everybody is the chosen people, man. Everybody is the chosen people. And we have to come together and remember that, and we have to play that out, and we have to make this world the beautiful gem that it has the ability to be. What I do here is to try to remind people of that beauty, and I do it through inspirational interviews. And today, I think you're going to be blown away by my interview with my very dear old friend, Ethan Davidson. How are you, Ethan?
I'm doing great. It's good to see you, Avram.
It's good to see you too. Now, we're not really dear old friends. We just met.
Yeah, right, exactly. But I want to say, because you mentioned Canada and that, and I want to say before we get to, to introductions, yeah, I'm sorry to hear, this about Canada. I've spent a lot of time, hitchhiking and train hopping practically everywhere in Canada. I've never been to Baffin Island, but I've been just about everywhere else, and spent a lot of time in the Yukon Territory. But I spent a lot of time in Toronto and in Montreal in particular, and just there were wonderful people in those places, and yeah, I spent some time on Bathurst Road in Toronto. So there's a lot of Jews around there, and a lot of non-Jews that like Jews a whole lot. So,
Oh, of course, of
yeah.
course. You live in Detroit, and there's no doubt in my mind. I know you're a musician. We have a mutual friend, Linda Clark, who's a
Yeah.
beautiful human being and brought us together. She's the shadchan here, the
Mhm.
matchmaker. And I'm guessing most of the people you play with, musicians, are not Jewish, correct?
That's right. Yeah, I think that I don't know that I've really played on tour with any Jews. When I was touring years ago, I don't think anybody in my band was ever Jewish. Yeah, yeah, and I don't think there's any people I play with now except for my wife.
Yes.
Yeah, she plays with me sometimes. I mean, she just comes down to my level.
That's very good of her.
Yeah,
People do that to me too, and I'm very happy when they do. By the
yeah,
way, we have a buddy in Detroit, David Nefesh,
yeah,
who's
for
a
sure.
musician,
Yeah,
a
we used to play
childhood friend
together
of mine.
years ago. Yeah, that's
Yes, he
good.
was telling me. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we're diving right into to the Ethan Davidson story today. We're thrilled to sit down with him. He's a Detroit-based folk singer-songwriter, and he's an author. He's a philanthropist. He has a very, very unique journey that he's been on, with 11 albums to his name and a career that's taken him across North America and into Europe. Ethan's music reflects his deep storytelling, his roots and life experiences. And beyond the stage, he is a key figure in Detroit's philanthropic community, helping lead the William Davidson Foundation, his dad, God bless his soul, who was the former owner of the Detroit Pistons and the Tampa Bay Lightning.
That's right.
From his, which is very cool, by the way, from his early days resisting the family business to embracing his role in preserving its legacy, Ethan's story is one of balance, it's one of courage and purpose. Join us as we explore his insights on music, legacy, and making a difference. And we're going to speak about his most recent book, which is called "And They Arose Early to Do Sexual Violence:
Right.
My Personal Mirror of Torah." Very, very powerful title and very powerful book, which we will get into shortly. So you're a lover of Torah, aren't you?
I'm a lover of Torah, and again, I apologize. I always have to keep moving. So if your viewers at home or wherever they are, get motion sickness from me, I'm very sorry, but we need to get our steps. So
Good.
we
No,
need to
keep
get our
going.
we need to get our steps in life and in Torah. But
Yeah,
yeah, I've
keep
always
going.
been
It's all good. It's all good. Move as much as you want.
for sure. I was always look, I was I was a day school kid growing up, and I was very interested in, let's say, more philosophy and that kind of thing, which then I went into in college. My mother was afraid I was going to grow up to be a rabbi, so maybe the joke's on her, but it's yeah, I was always motivated by philosophy, and I studied a lot of different religions. As a younger person, of course, never abandoning my Jewish sensibility, let's say, or my Jewish approach. So, and as I've gotten older and had kids and got involved with my father's foundation, which is largely Jewish focused, I decided that I needed to go sort of even deeper with Jewish texts and Jewish traditions. So yeah, it's something that I take very seriously. I know you do as well.
Yeah, no, I learn Torah every single day. I do Daf Yomi. And
Yeah,
I understand your family was responsible for bringing the entire Talmud to Sepharia.org, correct?
that's exactly right. Yeah, and that's something that I think everybody in my family is very proud of. To give you a little background on that story, with Safaria, uh, my father had invested in the Davidson Archaeological Park at the Kotel. So I say that's the most important piece of Jewish real estate, and his name is on that. And then when we met the guys from Safaria, I thought, what's the most important piece of virtual Jewish real estate? And that would be the online Talmud.
Yeah.
It was kind of funny when the Safaria guys came to meet us 10 or 12 years ago, whenever that was. Um, we have a very diverse Jewish family that are board members of the Davidson Foundation, and of course, some of them, said, "What's the Talmud?"
Yes.
and others said, "What's the internet?" You know, so,
Right.
so
And
that
you were one of them, right?
yeah, that's right. So that says something about, like, the spectrum of Jewish observance from Reform to Orthodox that might exist within a family. In any event, we realized that we have this incredible text as part of our tradition, the Talmud, that for various reasons Jewish people feel like they can't access. They're unable to access. If you're not Orthodox, you might have trouble finding this text or even knowing about it. If you are a woman, or if you're maybe LGBTQ, whatever, there's different reasons why you may have felt it was difficult to access this text. So putting it online for free and hyperlinking it to all other Jewish texts was a way of democratizing the text, making it accessible to all Jews. And so now, if you say, why don't you study? Why don't you do Daf Yomi? Why don't you study Talmud? Um, if you had the excuse before that I couldn't find it, well, now we've taken that excuse away from you. So now why don't you study it?
Yeah.
Because
So,
obviously you can find it now.
Ethan, why don't people study it? Why don't people study Torah?
I think there's a complicated answer to that. I mean, I think one of the things is people are afraid of, I mean, if I can speak frankly, I mean, some people are afraid, well, if I intersect with this stuff, I'll become religious. Okay, well, whatever. I mean, if that's the excuse, is that, first of all, such a bad thing? Or maybe you won't become religious, and that's fine too. I don't, but it's like, not a really, if that's your excuse, that's not a very good excuse. Another thing is, we all, I think, can feel this way, that if I approach something or go into a space where I feel like um, I have a limited amount of knowledge, right? I might be very successful in other parts of my life. I might be a successful doctor. I might be a successful lawyer, whatever it is. But I go into a space where all of a sudden um, I'm coming from a place of very little knowledge. I can be self-conscious, and uh, and that's, I think, also a thing. If we feel that way, that I'm going to feel like an idiot walking into this text, or walking into this synagogue, or whatever it is, to try to get ourselves past that feeling of inadequacy, um, is, I think we have to run into those places where we feel a little bit insecure. For me, I don't know anything about anything anyway, so I got no problem going into the text or going into the synagogue. But
Yeah.
we should not feel so self-conscious. We should, like, it's okay to feel a little embarrassed and feel like, I don't know what this is, and to go into that. It's part of our heritage. We shouldn't feel ashamed that we don't know.
I grew up in an Orthodox family. My father was an Orthodox rabbi.
Yeah.
And I went to yeshiva near Israel here in Toronto
Right.
for
Right.
5 years. And I went to Sanhedria Mecheved, a yeshiva in Sanhedria, which was a Haredi yeshiva for a year.
Yeah.
So when I started learning Daf Yomi and Chumash extensively about 5 years ago,
Mhm.
I had to, Ethan, I had to get those voices of the rabbis out of my head.
Sure.
You know what I mean? That was the
Sure.
wall that I had to climb over, and it was bloody hard. So I'd be sitting there learning Masechet Brachot, let's say the very first track date, and I
Yeah.
would hear my, grade 11 rabbi saying, "Look inside, do Rashi, do Tosfos. Come on, you don't know it." And it was
Right.
very, very, very challenging me to to
Sure.
to sort of shelve those voices, respect them for who they were, but allow
Right.
my own personal soul to move forward. Did you have any walls that you had to climb over to learn your Torah?
Always. Yeah. I mean, always. And I think if we don't have those walls, um, then it's not. Look, it's like anything. If you think, okay, um, I want to get physically healthy, let's say, right? And I want to take on an exercise regime, right?
Right.
Because I want to be healthy, or maybe because, God forbid, I have some other kind of condition that's emerged, where the doctor says you do this and you get more physical activity. That walking that half mile, it can be tough, can be exhausting, but you push through that, and then you're walking a mile, and then you're walking 2 miles, and or whatever it may be, or you're swimming, or you're lifting weights, or whatever the case may be, that and it's challenging, right? But you got to keep pushing yourself that way in order to get healthy. When I think about these texts and what your rabbi said to you, push through this. Um, what you're doing with these texts, and what you're doing with this learning, is, how to be more of a human being, how to learn how to treat other people more like human beings, how to be more of a positive force in this life. And you are going to meet challenges through studying these things. You confront things in the text that make you uncomfortable. You confront things in the text that are difficult to understand. But if you can push through those walls, as you characterized it, that's going to help you to grow. It's going to
Right.
help you to be stronger as a human being, and to treat other people better as well. I mean, not saying that you don't. I'm saying for any of us, right? So you have to push through those walls. And nothing. If it's easy, then it's not. What's the value in that, right?
Granted. You've produced almost 12 albums. So, firstly, kol hakavod to you. Well done.
Thank you.
It's an outstanding body of work. I'm curious, Ethan. One who's a musician, music, I find it lies within their soul. They live and breathe those notes.
Mm,
And I find the same thing with Torah.
yeah,
And I'm just curious, do they intersect inside of your spirit?
for sure. I think the thing that I'm really doing, you know, I mean, to zoom way out on the whole thing with me, I'm trying to figure out who I am. I'm trying to figure out what's going on inside of me, why I react a certain way in certain situations, let's say, what sort of, dark spaces are inside of me and what's happening there, and how do I bring sort of light and consciousness to that. So I figured that out a little bit through well, to some degree through Torah study, right? I mean, I think of Torah as a mirror that, and as a, let's say, psychotherapeutic tool that helps me to unpack some of those things I just talked about. And then also similar, with the music, it's really, the music for me is, I mean, I write some love songs and I write those kind of things, but a lot of it is sort of also this philosophical psychotherapeutic exploration that I'm going through, and music is the vehicle to it. So when people say, "Oh, you're a musician," I think I'm not so much a musician as I am trying to do this some kind of public performative psychotherapy upon myself, and music happens to be the vehicle for that.
That's
Um,
nicely said. Nicely
yeah,
said.
that's what it is. So the two things are really tied together, and Jewish ideas, even though the music itself is not necessarily Jewish. I mean, the music is really not Jewish at all, but the lyrics and I think the sensibility, things I'm trying to say, are a lot of those ideas come from Jewish texts.
Your eyes change when you're singing. I've watched a number of your videos, and you go off into this ethereal place. And
Uh,
not knowing you, just meeting you through those videos, I got a little bit scared. Where do you go? Where do you go?
it's funny. I used to, one of the things that happens, I think, when it's a meditation in a way, I guess. One of the things that happens when you do it a lot, and I realized this when I was on the road. I used to be on the road a lot. 20, 30 years ago, I was doing 150 shows a year all over the world, and the longest tour that I did ran for 6 straight years at that pace. So that was 900 and something shows.
Wow.
And after a while of playing every night or every other night, you go into a zone. I think probably something like athletes do, and where you're not. I mean, I realized at some point that I was outside of myself, and I wasn't thinking about playing music while I was playing it. It just happens, And early on, when you're starting out, at least in my case, and I think it's probably like this for a lot of people, you're consciously thinking about the song you're playing or the thing that you're doing. But after a while, you kind of transcend that, and that happened to me. And I think it comes from doing it a lot, but it's also a place of it's some kind of place of meditation, and I'm trying to in a way shut off my I'm not even trying to shut off my conscious mind. My conscious mind sort of shuts off, and the music can have a an effect on opening my heart. um, or maybe not the music is opening my heart, but the things that I'm trying to put across in the words that I'm singing open my heart up. This is like a circumcision of the heart type of a thing. And yeah, I go into a different place sometimes. It doesn't happen all the time, but it happens. And it's a part of, again, it's a part of my healing process. And it's part of my personal psychotherapy practice. Well, that's
Do
what's.
you
I don't know
ever
if that
sing?
answers the question, or if I sound
It's
totally
okay. It was
crazy now, but
great.
that's what.
Ethan, I think that was a great answer to whatever question.
Good.
Tell me something. Do you ever sing Torah?
No, I don't. I'm not. I never learned to to lane. I mean, I've laned Torah here and there, not I mean, like a small handful of times, but I never really learned how to do that. And to be honest, I didn't grow up in a musical family.
Yeah.
And I didn't learn I didn't learn Jewish songs and the holiday. We didn't do that kind of stuff. So I don't really have that inside of me, in terms of a musical tradition. What I have musically inside of me is more, uh, Americana, um, blues, country. Mississippi is more my, Mississippi and out west cowboy music is more my where I kind of come from musically, and also Ireland and that sort of thing. So yeah, the Jewish singing Torah, it's not something that I know about.
You know the tune.
Feather horse.
You know the tune though, right? Na,
Yeah.
na, 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 na,
Oh
na.
yeah. Oh
Yeah,
sure.
yeah,
Yeah, for
yeah.
sure, for sure. And
Have you?
and when I go to a when I go to a when I go to a more Orthodox synagogue, I can, I mean, I know those, and I can, jump right in with that stuff. But sometimes they're like, why don't you, you could be the, Baltafila. And I'm like, I can't, that's not, that's not for, but thank you for asking.
I think your Shema would be kick ass, though. I'll be honest.
Well, thanks. I appreciate that.
In pursuit of understanding who you are, which you mentioned a few minutes ago,
Mhm.
have you been able to bring together the Mississippi inside of you with the Jerusalem?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think again, because I think that the lyrics and the things I'm trying to unpack are, largely informed by Jewish texts, Jewish philosophy. Um, yeah, and I think that, laying that over the top of Americana music, I think that kind of brings those two things together in a way. And I don't think that you know, the lyrics are, they're not in a lot of cases so overtly Jewish that non-Jews can't relate to them. I think that people pick up that on it, that it's spiritual, philosophical in a way. Um, I get, I mean, there's Jews that pick up on that, and then there's non-Jews that pick up on that, and then they want to ask me questions about texts and that, and I've got a friend who's an Episcopal priest here locally, and so he always wants to know about what I'm picking up on. He's familiar with a lot of Jewish texts, obviously, but he as one example wants to know, like, where I'm drawing from, and what it means, and would I come and speak to his community about it sometimes. So I said, sure, I'm happy to do that. So
Yeah.
people do pick up on it, but I translate it through this kind of Americana music. I do think there's a bridge between Mississippi and Jerusalem.
Yes, I think so too. By the way, this walking around thing is working beautifully.
Thank you, thank you.
Yeah, it gives me the opportunity to see your office. It's really quite beautiful, actually. Well done.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate that. I
Oh,
appreciate
absolutely well done.
that.
My as I mentioned before, my father was rabbinical. He was a rabbi, which means my mother was a Rebbitzin. God
Mhm.
bless their souls. They've both passed. And therefore, unlike a friend of mine whose father was a doctor who would bring home, things that weren't being handed out to patients, like Tylenol and things like that, my father would bring home Sfarim. He would bring home
Right.
books.
Right.
He would introduce us. Shlomo Karlbach was sleeping on our sofa when I woke up in the morning, and so was
Wow.
Meyer Kahani as well, by the way.
Wow. Wow. Amazing.
Now your dad was the owner of the Pistons. He was the Tampa Bay Lightning.
Yeah.
He was like one of the biggest business people in the world when it comes to glass.
Yeah.
So like growing up, did Isaiah Thomas like embrace you? What did your
Oh
dad
yeah.
what did your dad bring home for you?
Well, my earliest memory. Okay, so first of all, he bought the Detroit Pistons when I was 4 years old. So I don't really remember a time before that. But I remember, being really young, 4, 5, 6 years old, something like that. And Bob Lanier of blessed memory coming to the house. Now, if your listeners don't know who Bob Lanier was, he was one of the elite centers in the NBA in the 1970s. I mean, he was like, you know, he was competing with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Bill Walton and guys like that. Bob was 7 feet tall, maybe 7'1", something like that. He was he could give you 25 points a night, 20 rebounds a night. I mean, he was an exceptional player, and we had these balconies in our home, and the I don't know what you'd call them, but I don't know, stanchions or whatever, the rods that held up the balconies were kind of widely spaced, and so a child could go through these uprights on the balcony. This is something that would never pass code today. And so my sister and I would go through the little uprights on the balcony, and we'd walk. There was a little ledge there, and we would jump off jump off the ledge, and from the second floor, and Bob Lanier would catch us, and my dad just would laugh. He thought that was the greatest thing in the world, and it's like now you'd maybe call Child Protective Services or something. But
Yeah.
so that's I just remember Bob, this this giant human, catching us, and I wanted to be Bob Lanier when I grew up. I just thought he was the greatest in the world. And then came Isaiah, when I was 12 years old, and Isaiah was like 19, and he first came to Detroit, and he uh, had never I mean, obviously he'd been to University of Indiana, but there were a lot of things about being in the world that he hadn't, by his own admission, he tells the story, he hadn't figured out these kind of things. So my father really took him in, and he was at our home a lot. Especially those first couple of years when he was in Detroit before he got married, and he really became like an older brother to me. He still is. I mean, we talk, quite a bit, and he was here with the playoffs against the Knicks the other day, so we had an opportunity to see each other here, and we were always close. He was like the athletic son that my father never had.
Uh, I was gonna ask. I was gonna ask. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, well, my father was a frustrated athlete, and I'm a pretty physical person too, but I was interested in individual sports. I was never a team sports player. So Isaiah was really like the jock that the jock son that my father never had. So they had a special relationship. And when my father died, I mean, Isaiah was that evening. Isaiah was the very first person that I called, of course. And but they had a special bond, and I continue to have a very special bond with Isaiah and his family.
Remember that night when your dad died?
Yeah, I do remember that night when he died. It was just over 16 years ago, and he he had been a little bit, he had a couple of chronic issues. Mentally, he was completely fine. Physically, had been having ups and downs, and then sort of the last week or so, he was in the hospital, and then he came home, and I met that afternoon with his like sort of chief medical guy. Um, and we talked about, what do you think's going to happen? And I remember, we concluded that, well, it's coming sometime, you know, probably that summer, but it's probably not coming today, right? And then of course he did die later that day, but so you never can predict these things. I went to his home that evening. Um, we watched we watched Jeopardy and Wheel of Fortune, which he just thought were the greatest, shows. I mean, I always remember like if somebody he just watched the dumbest TV shows, I have to say. But I mean, but he when somebody was winning a lot of money on Wheel of Fortune, he'd like my father would say, "Gosh, you hope he's Jewish," and I'm like, and the guy's clearly not Jewish. I mean, the guy could be whatever, right? It's
Doug McDonald's.
yeah, right, exactly. He's like, yeah, the odds are that this guy's not. But my father wanted people to do well, and it just and he wanted everybody to do well, and so that was so we watched these game shows that night, and then the Pistons were playing in Toronto that night. So we talked about watch the game, and it became obvious to me that that the end was coming, and I said, let's just make it through the game, and so we watched that Raptors game, and it was right about the end of that game that night. Friday it was already Shabbat, Friday night, and he passed away right about the end of that game, and that was that. That was that.
Ethan, did your dad know you?
Well, I think. I mean, that's a tough question. I think that I have a lot to say about that. I think that we did know each other in a lot of ways. I think that in general, one of the questions that I have, for God is how well do any of us know each other? I mean, it takes a lot. It takes a lot of effort, even for any two humans, to even see each other, to really see each other, let alone to get to know each other. I mean, we have such a difficult time even just understanding each other, what the other's saying, no matter how clearly we might be speaking with each other. I think that my father knew a lot of things about me. I think that you know I knew a lot about him, and I've come to know him and understand him. I think even better um, over the last 16 years than I knew about him before. I mean, I still live with him in a lot of ways, and I still work for him. After all these years, and but it's tough. I mean, we were very different people. You know, um, he was always supportive of what I was doing. When I would come through Detroit on tour, he would come to these sometimes really nasty bars and clubs where I'd play. And eventually I had to tell him, like, there's not a place, there's not going to be a place for you to sit there, and you don't have to come. Don't, and he'd bring his older sister who was already, also, into her 80s at the time. But it's, you don't have to come. It's fine. I know that, I know that you're supportive, but, you know, there's no place to sit. Plus, you're the people know who you are. You
Yes.
don't
Yes.
you don't want them to bother you. It's like he didn't care about that. He was going to come to all these punk rock clubs and whatever. It was really funny. So he was supportive, and he knew me, but and we spent a lot of time together driving around the country, just the two of us, when I was a teenager and in my early 20s. So we knew each other, but we were different. And I think, there's always things that you don't know about the other person. Um, Look, I think there's things that we don't know about ourselves, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, again, that's what I'm trying to do with Torah study and with music, is to try to know myself as much as possible. And the more that I think, the more that I can know myself, the more I can know you and really see you when we encounter each other. And that's the kind of thing that I want to, that's the place where I want to be. in my life.
My father had a difficult time with me, and I
Mm,
had a difficult time showing myself to him.
sure.
When you were on stage playing and your dad was in some seedy bar with you,
Yeah.
were you okay just being yourself up there?
Yeah, for the most part. I mean, for the most part, it was tougher here than it was in a place where nobody knew me.
Yes.
Yeah. But I mean, at some point, I was going to be who I was going to be, and you know, yeah. Did you, your dad, had a tough time with you there because you grew up, um, very frum, and then you kind of went on your own. I mean, this is the thing, and I'm asking you now. As you begin to individuate away from your parents, can be difficult, right? I
Right.
think that's what you were saying a minute ago. I mean, that process of individuation um, can be quite difficult.
Yeah, it is. And I have a 19-year-old son. Thank God,
Mhm.
Baruch Hashem, who's a beautiful kid.
Yeah, yeah,
You ever have the feeling, Ethan, like, thank you, God, that's exactly the kid I want. You know,
yeah, for sure, for
right?
sure.
You have 3 kids. Am I correct?
Got 3 kids, three
Yeah.
boys. Thank God. Yeah, and they're all good kids.
Are
They're
you a good dad?
I try to be. I try to be. I think you'd have to ask them, They're
Yeah.
not here.
Yeah.
They're not here right now. They're at school. But I try to be. Look, I I learned a lot from my father about being present. My father, as you noted, I mean, my father had these global businesses. He had these sports teams and arenas. I mean, he had businesses all over the world, right? But the thing that he was very good about, and I think if you would ask people that worked with him, is he was very present, right? He was not distracted by things. And when he was with you, you felt that he was really with you. He didn't talk a lot, right? He listened a lot, and he really listened. And so I try to take that with my kids. I think about his approach with me. And the other thing that he did was he would take me on these one-on-one trips I briefly mentioned a minute ago. We'd go drive around the country and whatever, just the two of us. We'd go for a week or 2 weeks. And this was in the age before cell phones, before email, none of that. So when you were out there driving around, you were really, he didn't have contact with his businesses. And so I take each of my sons on these one-on-one trips.
No, that's awesome.
And I really try to, you have to make that time count. It's not, as people say, it's not the quantity, it's the quality of it. And so I really try to take many of the things that he taught me about being a father and employ that in my capacity as a father to my boys. And hopefully you know, nobody's perfect at it, but hopefully we're doing okay.
We would be remiss if we didn't speak for a moment or so before we get into your book
Sure.
about your mom. What was your mom like?
Well, here's the funny thing about it. Uh, I'm adopted, and I've had, and I know my biological parents who were never together. And I mean, except for creating me, but it's and so I bounced around a little bit early on and ended up with my dad, and then he was married a couple times. So I've really had a couple of moms. I work with my stepmom, my father's widow. We've known each other for 30 years now, and she's great. I mean, I my dad's third wife, who was my stepmom when I was 15. She's another one of my moms. I'm still close with her. She lives out in Utah now. And then my mom, who who adopted me, but I didn't really grow up with her so much. They split up when I was young. I'm close with her. She lives right down the street from me. She and her husband, who they've been married now for almost 50 years. Um, I'm close with them too. So it's funny when people say, "Hey, I ran into your mom."
You say which
I'm
one?
like, which one? Which one did you? Which one did
All of I say hello, yeah.
who are we talking about here? So and my biological mom, I'm close. She doesn't live around here. She's now living in Missouri, but I'm close with her, and it's interesting. My biological mom, um, who's not Jewish, she and her sisters all married Jews. So, so,
Yes,
so
yes.
they got a lot of Jews over there too, it turns out. But it was going to be Jewish one way or the other, I guess.
Uh, do, do you think to yourself, damn, what a score it was? I was adopted by the owner of the Pistons.
Yeah, it was. No, it's funny. It's just, yeah. I mean, I don't know how I ended up here, and my life has been very um, unusual in a lot of ways. I have a therapist, without going in too much into this, but this just comes to this question about what a score. I have a therapist who, and it was important for me to have a therapist who wasn't local. So I've had the same therapist out in San Francisco for the last 30 years. She's in San Francisco, and she's heard a lot. San Francisco, there's a lot of unusual stories, and she'll tell me once in a while. She's like, I've never heard a story quite like yours. It's
Yeah,
and
good.
I do take a bit of pride in that. I don't mean to sound narcissistic, but I'm like, I have an appreciation for sure that my story is pretty unusual, and I ended up in a look. The thing that's really important is, yeah, my father became very successful, as I was growing up, and we were comfortable when when I look back on it now, we would have been like comfortable when I was a baby. We were fine, but he obviously became really when I was a teenager. He became, extremely successful. But I mean, the thing is that forget the business and forget that became wealthy. He was successful as a human being,
Mhm, mhm.
and I was very lucky to end up with him as my father, being that he was so successful as a human being. And that's really, I think, the biggest testament, and the biggest thing that was fortunate in my life is that I ended up with a really, really decent guy,
Mhm.
you know.
Was going to hold that for a moment.
For sure. Well, I
Yeah,
appreciate
no,
that.
no, I was going to hold that. Um,
But he got that from his family. I mean, the whole family was really like that. They were good. They were just fundamentally good people. They weren't the most, okay. They weren't the most religious. That doesn't matter. But they treated people well.
did he embrace you and tell you he loved you?
Yeah, he did. I mean, he wasn't a very expressive guy, um, but you could feel that from him. He really cared. You know, he really cared. Yeah.
I oh, sorry, I have to ask you the last
Yeah.
question. I was just talking to
Sure.
Shira Dicker. I don't know if you know Shira. She's Linda's friend, Linda Carr's
Yeah.
friend,
Oh yeah.
who
Yeah.
brought us together. She's a beautiful human being, an
Sure.
activist, just cares pretty much about every single human being. She's adopted as well, and we're working on something together right now. Something a young woman who's been abused, and we're trying to help her through my podcast and so on. And when working with Shira, I just saw her deep sense of empathy for this person and for others. And I asked her at some point, just sort of willy nilly, I said, Shira, do you think there's anything to the fact that adopted kids perhaps are more empathetic? She said,
Mm.
yeah, I've thought about that. And I think that could be the case. What do you think of that?
I think so. I mean, I hope so. I don't know. I can't speak for myself, but I think, uh, you know, I mean, my life could have turned out a lot differently. I know about my, uh, the paths that some of my biological relatives have taken. I mean, and I'm lucky there that everybody that I met in my biological family, all good people as well. But I appreciate how much some of them have struggled. I mean, my biological father, who I've only met a handful of times, and I haven't had any contact with him in maybe 20 years. I think he's had his struggles, which I won't get into. But it's life hasn't always been so comfortable or so easy for him. Um, and I appreciate how things could have been different. I remember one of my biological brothers on my biological mother's side, um, told me years ago. He said, "Well, sometimes we were." He said, "I remember a lot of times we were getting in the van and we weren't going anywhere. You know, um, they lived in the van, right? And I lived in a van too when I was touring as a musician, but I could also go home and live in a house, right?
Yeah.
Other people that I'm related to didn't have that option, and I appreciate that. So if that makes me more empathetic, or if experiences like that make adopted people more empathetic, um, then that's good. I mean, I wish that we would all be more empathetic, but yeah, I don't know.
By the way, I'm a great lover of RVs and vans. Do you like vans today?
I do, yeah. Yeah. In fact, my brother-in-law just purchased a new RV for me, and
Oh,
I mean, I purchased it, but he went to go get it, so I haven't seen it yet. But so this summer I'll be traveling in there with the kids, and
how long is it? You know?
this is a shorter one. We did have that first COVID summer, we went out and got like a 40-foot RV, and we used that. We lived in that first COVID summer, and then used it a lot the next couple of summers. But honestly, we don't need something that big, so we traded that in. And I think the new thing is maybe 26 feet or something like that.
Yeah,
So
that's good. That's good. You
yeah,
could park in bet more places that way, right?
yeah, it can go anywhere. Yeah,
Solar on the roof, the whole thing, right?
the whole thing.
I love
Yeah,
I love
exactly.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah, good for you. All right,
yeah.
ladies and gentlemen, I want to just tell you a little bit about a book that Ethan, now my friend, has
Mhm.
written. Um, inspired by his own experiences in the tragic events of October 7th, 2023.
Yeah.
He wrote, "And they rose early to do sexual violence, my personal mirror of Torah." Um, it's very interesting because he was writing another book at that time, more so about himself, and it was
Mhm.
almost complete.
Yeah.
And he decided wisely, from my estimation,
Mhm.
that it was probably best not to focus on himself in such an incredibly difficult time. And he launched into writing this book, which he had been taking notes on over the years. I
Mhm.
sort of talk about you like you're not there.
It's okay. It's all right.
And it's a fascinating book, especially if you're a lover of Torah. And if you're not, get down to it, man. And essentially, yeah, right. Essentially, it's about much sexual violence within the Torah itself,
Mhm.
and how we interpret that, and how we learn it, and what God was doing at that time, and how the world changed because of it. It really is a fascinating book, and I want to wish you, firstly, kol hakavod for
Mm.
writing it. It's your second book, am I correct?
That's my second book. Yeah, the second one that I've put out. There's a few others in the you know. Yeah, it's the second one I've put out.
What time did you write of the day?
um Whenever I could. I mean, I just it's like, I got to find like a chunk of time and do it. And uh but it's sort of like whenever I can. I mean, a lot of times inspiration will come like really as the day is sort of dawning, right? And so that was always a good time to get started.
When I was in yeshiva, I had what would be qualified today as sort of sexual abuse against me. It
Yeah.
wasn't
Yeah.
dramatic.
Right.
I was 16 years old, and this fellow asked me if I wanted to go driving in his car. And at 16, you say, "Oh yeah, frickin' yeah, I'm there, right?"
Sure.
And we're
Sure.
driving, and as I'm driving, he's putting his hand on my thigh,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
he's moving it up.
Hmm.
And I turned to him, I stopped the car, and I said, "If you don't take your hand away from there now, I'm going to stop the car and I'm going to beat the shit out of you."
Yeah.
Now, I'm
Yeah.
not violent and I never have been, so I don't know quite what I would have done.
Yeah.
But that was sort of the extent of sexual abuse that I had experienced. Now,
Yeah.
you said, excuse me, that you have experienced mental and sexual abuse. Can you talk about that at all?
Yeah. I won't get into specifics because the it was uh, two family members in particular who are both. First of all, I want to say at the outset, my father, Bill, protected me absolutely. So I don't want. I want to make sure that people know that was not to implicate him in any way. He helped me get out of this situation. He protected me, and it was two other family members who are still in the community and quite elderly now, and I so I don't go into any more kind of detail than that in a public way. They've done teshuva. you know um they had issues with drugs at the time. They did teshuva a long time ago, and so that's why I don't get into but so I leave it at that, if that's all
Sure.
right. And I don't want to um they didn't they weren't sort of doing this out in the community to other kids. If it had been like that, it could be okay, a different story, right? um and so that's that. But but it was something that obviously um I've wrestled with my whole life. And you do hear stories about kids who were abused, grew up to be abusers. And I wanted to make sure that God forbid, I wasn't going to do that when I had kids. And of course I haven't done that. Done that. But I needed to sort of heal those parts of me, and I spent a long time in therapy, dealing with those things. And when I think about the dark parts within me and the kind of things that I try to get out through song, it's all part of that healing process in a way, and all that process of trying to be more human and treat other people as human beings. So then when October 7th happened, and as I said, I've spent a lot of time dealing with these issues in my, personally. When October 7th happened and there was sexual violence there, and particularly when I, when people were either either friends of mine or people in positions of power out there in the world were quick to deny that there was sexual violence. They said this is Israeli propaganda. There's no evidence there was sexual violence. Or they would say, well, there was sexual violence, but we have to put it in some kind of context. That was deeply offensive to me. I think that should be offensive to anybody. We're just coming out at that time of the Me Too movement, where if somebody, God forbid, said that they were subject to sexual violence, we took them at their word. We didn't question that, right?
Yes.
Now all of a sudden that it happened in Israel, you know, and not just to Jews, but also happened to Bedouins, happened to Thai farm workers, but it happened in Israel. So now it's all of a sudden we got to say, well, it didn't happen, or maybe they deserved it in some way, kind of way, because after all, they're in Israel. So that was deeply offensive to me. And I kind of had thought maybe that we could all agree that sexual violence is bad, period. Right?
Mhm.
Maybe I was naive, but I kind of thought that was something that we could all agree upon, right? And apparently it wasn't something we could agree upon. And then, we have responses to this violence. We have the prosecution of perpetrators of this kind of violence, whether through the criminal justice system or in this case through a war. And of course, there's limits to those responses to violence. There's limits to the prosecution of a war. And I'm not making any judgment about what Israel is or is not doing in Gaza. That's not the thing. My thing was to take the information that we have from our classical Jewish texts, which deal with sexual violence and responses to sexual violence and wars that come about as a result of sexual violence. For instance, the story at the end of the book of Judges, where there's a rape and then a civil war among the Jewish tribes, among the Israelite tribes. And so I wanted to put that information out there as a way of asking questions and framing discussions around Jewish, within the Jewish community. What are the appropriate responses to this violence? We should all agree again that this violence is bad. Sexual violence is bad. Attacks are bad, and we have a right to defend ourselves against a violent attack. What kind of responses are appropriate? What kind of responses are inappropriate? Where are the bounds of these sorts of things? And how can we use the Jewish texts to understand these issues? How can we use the Jewish text to understand things that are happening in the world, today, right now? And how can we use these texts to unpack how we feel about what's happening in the world? So that's and as a way to, if we've, God forbid, had these sort of things happen to us directly, how can we use these texts to help heal ourselves as I said earlier, as a psychotherapeutic tool? And so that's why I wrote this book, and the title of it is provocative. And they arose early to do sexual violence. But this is my translation of a pasuk of a Torah verse in the 32nd chapter of Exodus, in the golden calf episode, where it says that the people arose early to do tzachek, and that word tzachek has a number of different meanings, one of which could be sexual violence. And so and I make the case early on in the book why I'm translating that verse that way. So the title. Yes, the title's provocative, but it is my, I think, perfectly legitimate translation of a Torah verse. And I wanted to put right out there that, no, there was sexual violence. Unfortunately, there is sexual violence in the world. And we should all be prepared to stand against that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so that's where I am, and I'm very sorry to hear that you had these experiences as a young person that were inappropriate and uninvited. Especially from somebody that you looked up to. I mean, that's a and we wish and pray that there should be healing for everybody, especially for people that are unable to control themselves with children in this kind of a way, that they should find a way for themselves to be healed and to be able to have some self-control where they're not doing this kind of thing to children.
Amen. So let's give an example that's found in your book. By the way, it's interesting that you talk about the word tzachek or letzachek, because you find that word also in a positive place. I believe when Yitzchak was with his wife Rivka, and the king was looking out the window and he saw them playing.
That's right.
What I always took away from that pasuk was that they were having sexual relations, right?
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So there's a story in the Torah about Dinah in Genesis 34, 1, 2, and it goes as follows. Dinah, the daughter of Leah. Interesting, the daughter of Leah.
Yeah.
Not her husband. Whom she had born to Jacob, went out to see the daughters of the land. That in itself is fascinating. What does it mean she went out to see the daughters of the land?
Right.
Shechem, the son of Hamor the Hivite, prince of the land, saw her. He took her.
Yeah.
He lay with her.
Yeah.
And he violated her.
Yeah. Mhm.
Now, the follow up to that, and I want to throw this to you,
Yeah.
was that her brothers were not happy with this,
Right.
as one
Right.
can imagine,
Right.
because the understanding was that she was raped by
Right.
Shem, who was a prince.
Raped and kidnapped. He still had her locked away somewhere.
Yeah.
Right.
So what did
Yeah.
they do? They went in, they came up with a strategy
Hmm.
and ultimately went in and wiped out the entire nation of Shem,
Yeah. Yeah. The entire adult male population
the
anyway.
entire adult male population.
Yeah. And
So,
they carried away the women and children, which is another, you
right,
know.
right, right. So it's a very, very strange and difficult part of the Torah.
Right.
Ethan, what are we to take away from this?
Well, so here's the thing that I was interested in with that is, you can, and I think that, because I mentioned October 7th at the beginning of my book, I think that, the sensitive reader will look at this episode of Dina and say, "Oh, this is something like October 7th and the subsequent war." And so, should we be um, prosecuting Shem, the prince, right, and maybe his father, right, for this crime? Uh, that's like going after Sinwar or the leadership of terror organizations that perpetrated these kind of things. Or, are all the people of Shem complicit? Because they didn't bring the prince to justice. What I remember meeting with some hostage families, 2 months after October 7th, and there was a guy whose elderly father was taken captive by Hamas. He was subsequently released. This was a guy by the last name of Moses, and his father was subsequently released alive earlier this year.
I
But
interviewed his son, by the way. Yair, I interviewed him. Yes.
yeah, yeah, it's Yair, and I remember Yair saying to me, and he said this publicly, so I'm not saying anything that he hasn't said publicly, but he said at the time, he said there's no innocent people in Gaza,
Mhm.
and I heard that. I mean, I'm not gonna look, I'm not gonna argue with the guy. His father is being held in a tunnel somewhere. Um, it's not my place to push back on that, but I had questions, and my question is, were there innocent people in Shechem? And when you go through the rabbis, the classical rabbis that commented on this episode, you have, on the one hand, Maimonides, who, and I go through this in the book. Maimonides says, well, the people had a responsibility to establish a court of justice and bring the prince to justice. The fact that they didn't do that makes them complicit in the rape and the kidnapping. Okay, so that's one extreme. There are no innocent people in Shechem. And then the Maharal of Prague, takes a kind of a different approach, maybe a middle approach, where he says, well, they would have been afraid to bring the prince to justice, but in the end, as the Maharal goes through it, he kind of comes out implicating them as well. Uh, Ramban Nachmanides um, says no, they were, and he has a lengthy piece, of course, and he refutes all the other people that came before him, and he ends up coming to say, no, what Shimon and Levi did, massacring the entire population, was wrong. Right. So I think that when looking at the Shem episode and when going through the different sages, that can sort of help us to unpack, okay, how do we feel about, and again, I'm not, taking sides here about, what Israel is doing or was not doing, and that. I'm saying that the sages can help us to sort of unpack how we feel about these kind of things. We're all going to have an emotional reaction to a war anywhere. I mean, I do find it fascinating that nobody seems to care about what's happening in Sudan or or 100 other conflicts around the world. but even more brutal, right? Um, but I think the rabbis can help us to understand and unpack how we might feel and how we might respond to these kind of things, um, and what we as a Jewish people are doing or not doing in response to violence that is inflicted upon us. So that's interestingly, a friend gave me a book I've got it right here, Athalia Brenner, called "I Am," and she writes. Athalia Brenner writes in the voice of Dina in this case, and her take on it, speaking in Dina's voice, is that my brothers did exactly the right thing. They did the thing that my father wouldn't do. She praises Shimon and Levi for massacring the entire population. And I was quite moved by that. Again, I'm not, if I'm hearing Dina speak and say that, I can't argue with Dina either, right? I mean, I think that's an amazing and powerful thing. I might not agree with it, but that's an amazing and powerful thing to say. No, I'm glad my brothers massacred this entire population. That was the thing they should have done. It's powerful.
Yeah, that is very powerful, and I think with the sensitivities that we've developed in the West, let's say,
Yeah,
at first blush, it feels almost anathema to
yeah,
what we believe to be right, you know.
yeah.
But then someone comes along with that school of thought and says, no, these are evil people to the core,
Right.
and they need to be wiped out, not only for what they did to Dina, but what they've done to others and what they could do.
Yeah.
It's hard for us in Detroit and Toronto to accept that, but it is a school of thought.
It's a school of thought. And I mean, I guess if you were to ask me, you know, what troubles me is, look, I mean, there are kids in Gaza that and others that want no part of this, right? And that's a tragedy that people that want no part of this are killed. uh you know and there's people in Gaza that have been marching against Hamas, and Hamas is killing them as well. Hamas was killing Palestine. I mean, Sinwar was in prison for killing Palestinians, right? I mean, the thing but you don't see any of that on social media. Everybody that's got a strong opinion about Israel on social media is absolutely silent about that kind of stuff. And that's, I think, what's really disappointing, is because I think, oh, I thought you cared about the Palestinians, but now
Yes,
that they're being killed by Hamas too, you're silent about that. So what's really going on here, right?
yes,
And
yes,
that really bothers me. I mean, everybody that we're talking about here are human beings, right? So,
yes, correct. If do you have a few more minutes?
yeah, for sure.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm enjoying this a
Me
lot.
too. Me too.
We dive into a completely different scenario in the Torah
Yeah.
of Lot and his daughters.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
here's what you write on page 137.
Sure.
In Torah,
Yeah.
there are at least two episodes in which children commit uninvited sex acts against their fathers, while these fathers are inebriated. And at least in the
Right.
case of Lot, we were speaking of inebriation to the point of being unconscious.
Right.
Curiously, God is absent.
Yeah.
Point well taken from both
Yes.
of these instances. And perhaps thankfully, in neither of these episodes do we find humans responding with violence. And
Right.
so perhaps these events will testify to the fact that the response to sexual violence can sometimes be more muted. And
Yeah.
further, my dear, I love the way you write. It's very personal. It's lovely. And further, my dear, it's very lyrical in some ways. We know that sometimes, sadly, there is no response whatsoever to sexual violence.
Yeah.
So Ethan, what was going on with Lot and his daughters?
Well, that's a strange. That's a
Bizarre.
strange and disturbing story. I mean, yeah, the first problem is sadly, and maybe more often than not, there is just silence in the face of sexual violence. I mean, think of how many people have had to endure sexual violence, and and it's met with a shrug by by others. I mean, and in this case, we don't hear from God. Um, it's strange. The, and the rabbis again, they're funny with Lot's daughters because they're like, well, they didn't think anybody else. They figured after the destruction of Sodom and Amorah and the cities of the plain that there was that these were they were the last three people on earth. These two young women and their father. The women thought we're the last people on earth, and the world won't be populated unless we take matters into our own hands. Okay, well, I hear the rabbis saying that, but then I'm thinking, look, God said previously during the flood that God will not destroy the whole world again, right? So they didn't know that, or they couldn't have gone out of the cave first to see if there were other people somewhere. I mean, they could have, but instead of just saying, I mean, how do you get to the point where you say, well, obviously the thing that we have to do is, effectively roofie our father. I mean, incapacitate him and get pregnant by him. I mean, why are you all of a sudden jumping to that? It
Yes.
seems absolutely ridiculous, to me. And, but the amazing thing is, and I don't know I've thought about this for many years, and I still don't know how to fully unpack this. The amazing thing is from this ghastly to me act of incapacitating a man, um, effectively, I guess, raping him, getting pregnant by him. That this is the beginning of where Mashiach comes from, where the Messiah comes from. I mean, we know that that the older daughter's son, Moab, is where Ruth is ultimately going to be a descendant of this awful incestuous relationship that Lot's daughters had with their father. But so the fact that that the redemption of the world can come from such a depraved, backward kind of a action here is when you look at other religions, and I've studied a lot of other religions, the savior of the world or the god or the whatever, comes from some kind of divine or half divine place, or is some kind of prince, or is some kind of, it's always it's always something kind of exalted. It's something that's kind of half divine at least, or fully divine. In Judaism, like the Messiah starts in a cave after the destruction of Sodom, where these young women take sexual advantage of their father while he's incapacitated. That's where the redemption of the world comes from. That's a very why would that be the story you would make up? I mean, and then I think I mean, you would never make that story up. And then and it's one of these things where I think the story must be real in some kind of different way, and it must really be teaching us something. I mean, you would never have redemption come from a place like that unless it was a real redemption. And may Messiah come soon, right? But it's a crazy, and you see this in the story of where Moshiach comes from in the Jewish tradition. It comes from these kind of depraved. The other root of it is, of course, Yehuda and Tamar. I mean, where Tamar is a sex worker. I mean, it's crazy that this is where Mashiach comes from. It's utterly unlike any other religious tradition of which I'm aware.
It's interesting in that light is that when you take a look at the first Jew, AVRUM,
Yeah,
his father was Terach,
yeah,
who was he made idols, right?
right. Yeah,
And,
exactly.
it's an interesting thing too about our Torah, Ethan, is that the rabbis sometimes they sort of curl up like pretzels to make
Yeah,
things work, right? So
yeah,
there are either midrashim or chachamim say I can't quote where, but that Terach did tshuva, you
yeah,
know.
right. Yeah, exactly.
So you'll
Yeah,
hear stuff like that.
You hear stuff like that, and the rabbis tie themselves up in as pretzels, as you say. You put it exactly right. And a lot of times when they do that, I'm like, okay, guys, come on,
Right, right,
really,
right.
really.
Exactly,
And it's
exactly.
okay to say that. That's a very Jewish response. I mean, I think that's a response we're kind of supposed to, and we got to figure it out. The rabbis show us a way, but we got to now. Come on, really? I got to figure
Yeah.
it out for myself. That's a very Jewish way to do it.
How did you feel about Hagar, the character Hagar, Abraham's concubine?
Well, I love Hagar. I wrote about Hagar in the first book. The interesting thing about the Hagar story is God tells Abraham, like right before we're introduced to Hagar, um, the stranger, right, as
Mm-hmm.
her name means. God tells Abraham right before that, know your descendants will be strangers in a strange land. God doesn't tell Abraham that it's going to be Egypt, but if we've read ahead, we know that it's going to be Egypt. And they'll be oppressed, and God uses these words, in these Hebrew words, Ainu, that for oppression and that kind of thing. And then right after that, the Torah says, and they had this maidservant Hagar. After we've already heard that we were going to be Gerim, and that uh, Sarah oppressed, and she was Egyptian, and Sarah oppressed her. Right? And it's like, and
Yeah.
then when she runs away, she goes to she's on the road to Shur, which is when the Israelites leave Egypt, they're on the road from Shur,
Yeah.
and so there's all so Hagar, slash the Israelites. There's a thing here that the Torah is trying to communicate to us about being an outsider, not oppressing the outsider, and it begins with this story of Hagar. The interesting thing is that Abraham and Sarah, at least in the text, they never speak her name. The text tells us that her name is Hagar, the stranger, but Sarah and Abraham only call her the maidservant.
Yeah.
They don't use her name, and it's only when she runs away the first time and the angel of God calls her by her name. That's the first voice that speaks her name outside of the text. And I mean, apart from the narrative voice of the text, I should say. And that angel speaks her name, and then and Hagar is the first person in Torah to give God a new name. And Hagar calls the name of God El Roi, the God who sees, because you're nobody has seen me up until now, but you, God, are the first, you know, being that actually sees me, right?
That's a
And
nice
so,
thought. It's
yeah,
a lovely
God's
thought.
the God. God is the God that sees the stranger. That God is the God that sees the outsider, even when Avram Avinu cannot, even when Sarah, our foremother, cannot see the stranger. In this case, God sees the stranger.
I mentioned to you that I do a podcast with Rabbi Shlomo Gomorrah, who is a true Talmud Chacham and a most refreshing voice when it comes to Torah. Very progressive, very creative. And he was
Yeah,
telling me about Parshat Tazria Metzora, which we learned last
yeah,
week. And it's
sure.
all about terrible pimples on your body and affliction, right? And they'll have a hair growing out of it and all that really gross shit you don't want to
Real
talk about.
close.
Yeah, crazy stuff. And he
Mm,
said to me, Avram, he said, this could be that these are the most two important parshiot in the Torah. I said,
yeah,
Rabbi, we're talking about a very strange affliction here, and a lot of people just pass these over. He
sure.
said, no, because what happens is the person is pushed outside of the camp, chutz lamachane,
Mm,
and
hmm.
and who comes out to check on them to see how they're doing? The
Yeah,
Kohen Gadol, the high priest.
right,
And he said
right.
that is the reflection of that. Our bodies can be a source of pride, or our
Yeah,
bodies can be cause us deep, deep embarrassment.
for sure.
Yet God is there with you at your worst of times,
That's right.
as he was with Hagar.
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
and I think that's such a beautiful piece.
That is a beautiful piece.
Isn't that lovely?
That is a beautiful piece. Yeah, thank
Yeah.
you for that. Yeah.
Absolutely. Ethan, in conclusion,
Mhm.
I've been playing around with AI over the last few months,
Yeah.
and more often than not, I have AI compose, if that's the proper term, a poem about my guests.
Hey,
So I have an ode to Ethan Daniel Davidson,
sounds good.
written by AI, and it goes like this. It goes like this. In Detroit's heartbeat, where Motown resounds, Ethan Daniel Davidson treads sacred grounds. A folk weaver's voice with 11 tails spun, his songs cross the continents, free as the sun. From Bloomfield's green roots, he shunned gilded ways, resisting the empire of his father's days. Bill's Pistons roared, lightning struck in his name, yet Ethan sought truth in a wanderer's flame. With guitar in hand, he carved stories deep of life's fleeting joys, of the secrets that we keep. Each chord holds a mirror, each verse a sharp cry, reflecting the soul where the shadows don't lie.
Mhm.
His book, bold and raw, dares to wrestle with light, and they arose early, probes Torah's dark night. A poet's fierce gaze on the sacred and torn, he seeks what is holy in texts battle worn.
Mhm.
Through philanthropy's grace, he tends to the flame. The William Davidson Foundation bears his name. From Motown's proud streets to the stages of lore, he honors a legacy, yet seeks something more. A troubadour's heart with a mission to mend. His music and mercy in harmony blend. On O Ethan, you dreamer with courage to roam, your songs build a bridge from the world to the home.
Man, that's I mean that was beautiful. I appreciate that. I do. Thank you for that.
Yeah,
Kola
I'll
kabod.
send it. I'll send it over to you.
Please do. Yeah.
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 Ladies and gentlemen, at the end of my podcast, I ask you to please consider what it is that you just heard and what you can take away from it. And excuse me, life can be very, very challenging for a lot of people. You can be adopted, you can go through sexual abuse, you can go through such difficult, difficult times. And one can lay down and say, you know what, man, I can't really deal with this because I've been given some really bad cards in life. And I understand that. I get that when people do that. But I would like to encourage you to hear Ethan Davidson's story and to understand what he has gone through and his ability to pick himself up and to make a beautiful life for himself, a really beautiful life with music and with Torah and with family and with caring. And again, God forbid, I'm not standing in judgment of anybody's response to trauma. All I'm saying is there are opportunities out there where one can get therapy, where one can discuss their situation, and one can grow through the pain and through the suffering. Ethan, do you want to add anything to that in conclusion?
I think you got it, man. There are opportunities out there for healing, and we should find those. We should all find those, and we should take advantage of those, and we should be healed.
Do you feel the healing inside of you happen?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. I do. I mean, it's always a work in progress. I mean, I don't think I've somebody. I was like talking to somebody I don't know a year ago, and they said, "Well, they were talking about a family member of mine. I won't say who, and they said, "Well, they're on their journey." I said, "Oh, and you're not on your journey? You've arrived somewhere? Thank you. What's it like over there?"
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, good one. I like that. Yeah, yeah. I'd like to come
Yeah.
visit sometime. Yeah, exactly.
Right, exactly.
All right, folks. Thank you very much. Once again, the book is called "And They Arose Early to Do Sexual Violence." It's available on Amazon, correct?
No, it's available if you find me on social media and send me a direct message, and I'll tell you how to get it.
Okay, very good.
Yeah. Yeah.
I want to thank everybody for joining us, for listening, and for watching. And as they say in Yiddish, sei gesund, which means go in good health. And until we meet again, thank you so much. And thank
Sei
you.
gesund.
Yeah, sei gesund.